Under the golden haze of a quiet summer morning, Clarence's house was anything but calm. Aides shuffled swiftly through stone corridors, their phones pressed tightly to their ears, eyes wide with the kind of urgency reserved for national emergencies. Something had just landed on the king's desk. Not a diplomatic communique, not a constitutional matter, not even an economic forecast. This was something far more personal, something explosive, a betrayal, wrapped in ribbons of calculated charm, wrapped in a scandal that would erupt mere days before a birthday no one in the palace wanted to acknowledge anymore. King Charles stared in silence at the document laid before him. It wasn't a formal declaration, nor a letter begging forgiveness. It was a pitch deck, sleek, professionally polished, confidential, or so Meghan Markle had assumed. And in it, her latest project, a documentary so piercing, so unfiltered, it made their 2021 Oprah interview look like a charity luncheon. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The working title read, Meghan's Truth, The Silence Before the Storm. In that moment, the storm began. The betrayal wasn't just in what was planned, but how it had all been hidden. For months, maybe even years, Meghan had reportedly collected voice memos, handwritten letters, secret footage, and personal recollections from her brief time in the royal spotlight. The deck promised never-before-seen content, recordings from palace meetings, candid letters exchanged with the late Queen and King Charles himself, and intimate behind-the-scenes clips from the infamous Megxit negotiations. The very fabric of the monarchy was now on display, potentially torn apart for public consumption. But the timing? That's what made the betrayal feel razor-sharp. It wasn't just a tell-all. It was an ambush. Meghan, ever strategic, had allegedly planned the release of the first teaser trailer days before her birthday. Not after. Not months later. Days before. A double-edged move that would command the headlines and cast her in the role of a silenced heroine reclaiming her narrative, while painting the royal family as cold, cruel, and complicit. And the king, still reeling from the countless salvos launched by his son and daughter-in-law since their California escape, saw the move for what it was, deliberate, calculated, cruel. He didn't hesitate. In an extraordinary break from protocol, King Charles immediately stripped Meghan of every royal title and honorary privilege she still held. No more Duchess of Sussex. No more HRH status by marriage. Not even the symbolic military associations she once clung to during public appearances. It was all gone, revoked with the same ink used to sign the very letters now weaponized in her revenge campaign. But this wasn't just a story of monarchy versus Hollywood. This was personal, emotional, explosive, because at the center of it all was Prince Harry, once the beloved rogue royal, now a man caught in the firestorm between his birthright and his bride. And for the first time since Megxit, it was whispered that even he hadn't seen this one coming. The palace had learned about the documentary through confidential industry contacts. Executives from multiple streaming platforms had reportedly been approached. The pitch was airtight, marketable, brutal, and most importantly, unauthorized. What rattled Charles most wasn't even the content, as damaging as it promised to be. It was the sense of premeditation. That Meghan had quietly been preparing this documentary while smiling in public, while visiting the Queen in her final months, while issuing platitudes of reconciliation in carefully worded press statements. That every moment, every gesture, every supposed olive branch might have simply been for the camera. What would the public think if they knew she'd been secretly recording, taking notes, preserving letters with the intention of turning them into scenes for a documentary? Inside sources say one letter alone, addressed from Meghan to King Charles during their final days as working royals, would upend the narrative she once publicly shared. It wasn't the tone of a victim pleading for peace. It was clinical, cold, tactical, as if even then, she knew how the story might someday be edited, and who would be the villain. And yet, the document also contained deeply personal exchanges between Meghan and the late Queen Elizabeth. Notes where Meghan appeared to seek guidance, consolation, perhaps even understanding, but out of context and packaged for dramatic effect. Even those soft moments could be spun into damning evidence of the monarchy's alleged emotional detachment. What struck royal insiders hardest was this. The framing of the documentary wasn't just Meghan's story. It was a thesis, a case, against the monarchy. She positioned herself not as a woman overwhelmed by media scrutiny, but as a target of a centuries-old institution whose traditions, she claims, demand silence from the women it elevates. Even more chilling was the alleged voice memo excerpt transcribed in the pitch materials. "I wasn't leaving. I was being erased," Meghan had reportedly recorded in a private reflection just after the infamous Sandringham summit. Whether that quote was meant for therapeutic journaling or future media use, no one could say. But its presence in a commercial pitch raised grave questions. Who else had she recorded? What else was on tape? What private conversations, those presumed sacred between family members, had been captured and now repurposed for a narrative designed to destroy? Meanwhile, Prince Harry was nowhere to be found. Sources say he had been blindsided by the leak, finding out not from Meghan, but from a concerned contact in the media industry who recognized the pitch as the real thing. Harry, stunned and humiliated, reportedly begged King Charles for a pause. For time. He needed to understand the full scope of what had happened, of what his wife had done, and perhaps of what it might mean for his already fractured relationship with his family. Some insiders whispered that Harry didn't speak to Meghan for days following the leak. Others claimed he privately admitted he had no idea the project had been pitched, let alone finalized for streaming discussions. And in those silent days, a royal son stood suspended between two worlds, one he was born into, and one he helped build with a woman who may have just taken the final match to the bridge connecting them. The timing of it all made it even harder to ignore. Meghan's birthday was less than a week away when news broke. Her team allegedly believed the emotional collision of a title-stripping scandal and a birthday celebration would ignite sympathy globally, that she could frame herself as a woman punished for telling the truth, a mother silenced, a wife exiled. And yet, the palace saw it differently. They saw it as a manipulation of public perception, a stunt, one final spectacle meant to provoke chaos inside the walls of Buckingham, and perhaps dare them to retaliate. They did, swiftly, decisively. For King Charles, this was not just about Meghan. It was about the crown, about the institution, about the warning shot this documentary might send to anyone who still believes in the sanctity of royal duty. He knew that if he failed to act, if he blinked, the headlines would forever portray him as powerless, hesitant, and broken by the woman he had once welcomed as a daughter-in-law. And so, in a statement released to senior aides but never directly quoted in the press, the king authorized the final blow. All remaining titles and honors held by Meghan Markle were to be officially removed. Not discussed, not debated, removed. The official announcement was worded with formality, polite, impersonal, sterile. But within the palace walls, the air was electric with emotion. What now? What happens when a duchess becomes just a name? When a mother of royal children becomes a private citizen by royal decree? When a once sympathetic figure begins to be viewed as an architect of her own downfall? And more importantly, what happens when the public sees both sides at once? In a few short days, the world would no longer be celebrating Meghan Markle's birthday. They'd be watching a reckoning. And this time, the crown wasn't staying silent. From the outside, it looked like a perfect Californian morning. The sun kissed the stone walls of the Montecito estate where Meghan Markle now resided, far away from the centuries-old corridors of Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace. The scent of lavender drifted from the garden. Inside, aides moved carefully, orchestrating what was to be a quiet, celebratory week. Balloons were being prepped in neutral tones. A local caterer had been discreetly contacted. A list of trusted guests was being double-checked. Meghan's birthday was approaching, and not just any birthday, but one that marked her entry into a new chapter, one she reportedly planned to reframe as a rebirth. But even as she curated her image, graceful, serene, empowered, there were whispers. Not from the Sussex camp, but from far more dangerous quarters, the palace. Because in London, the palace wasn't planning balloons. They were preparing for war. Behind closed doors, aides were combing through something far more damaging than a celebratory Instagram post. A document. First dismissed as rumor, then verified with spine-chilling clarity, had begun circulating among trusted media executives and a handful of discreet insiders in the industry. It was Meghan's secret project, a full-fledged documentary pitch that promised to upend everything the world thought it knew about her royal exit. The pitch was not a draft. It was polished, professional, and worst of all, already making the rounds with at least 2 major streaming platforms. What caught the palace's attention wasn't just the bombshell nature of its content, but the timing. The teaser, Meghan's team allegedly hinted, would be dropped just before her birthday. A perfect storm. For her team, the logic made sense. Launching the trailer days before her birthday would ensure maximum media attention. The contrast was irresistible. Headlines juxtaposing royal rejection with personal celebration, a woman stripped of everything reclaiming her voice as she blew out birthday candles in Montecito. The narrative would write itself. Meghan wronged. Meghan silenced. Meghan rising. But for the royal family, the move felt less like strategy and more like provocation. A gut punch wrapped in glitter. Sources close to the king described him as gutted, not just by the betrayal, but by the audacity. They weren't just being outmaneuvered, they were being humiliated. On purpose. And this time, there would be no carefully worded public statement urging unity. This time, there would be consequences. The tension had been building for months. Meghan had largely remained under the radar following a string of high-profile media moves, the Netflix docuseries, the Spotify fallout, and public criticism of the royals cloaked in vague but piercing language. But even as her brand seemed to cool on the surface, something was brewing behind the scenes. Now, it was boiling over. The documentary, insiders confirmed, was titled Meghan's Truth, The Silence Before the Storm. Not a royal perspective. Not life after the crown, but Meghan's truth. It was not subtle. It was personal. And it implied, perhaps more than anything else she'd done before, that the real story had yet to be told. The pitch deck included never-before-seen voice memos Meghan had allegedly recorded during private royal conversations. It also teased exclusive footage from their departure negotiations, letters written by Meghan to the late Queen, and, most damning of all, handwritten correspondences with King Charles that, according to her notes, would reveal the emotional vacuum at the heart of the monarchy. What unnerved the palace wasn't just the existence of this material, but the context in which it was being presented. Meghan wasn't painting herself as a confused outsider or a misfit struggling within a rigid institution. This time, she was the protagonist of her own resistance. The deck's language was pointed, emotional, and at times, eerily accusatory. Lines like, "I was never welcomed. I was tolerated," and "silence was their form of control." Or worse, "Even the late Queen believed I needed to know my place, not as a woman, but as an outsider." For those inside the monarchy, these words weren't just exaggerations, they were daggers. And the biggest twist? Harry reportedly had no idea any of this was happening. Multiple sources confirmed that Prince Harry discovered the documentary not through Meghan, but from a media executive who had been approached about potential distribution. One call turned into 5. Emails were exchanged. And suddenly, Harry found himself staring at a project that bore his family's scars and his wife's name, without his knowledge or involvement. The betrayal was twofold. Not only had Meghan allegedly recorded personal royal moments, but she had done so while still wearing the titles and privileges that came with the crown's blessing. And now, days before her birthday, those very recordings would be used to rewrite the narrative. On her terms, for her profit, and at the monarchy's expense. It was a trap, but was it a birthday gift to herself, or a warning to the world? King Charles wasted no time. Historically, title removals are a long, ceremonial affair, often dragged out over months. They're diplomatic, legal, and cloaked in subtle language. But this wasn't a historical moment. It was a breaking point. Charles moved swiftly, calling an emergency meeting with top aides. Discussions were held behind reinforced doors. Lawyers reviewed the implications. And in a matter of hours, the decision was made. Meghan Markle would no longer hold any official royal title or honor. Every vestige of status granted by marriage would be stripped, effective immediately. The announcement wasn't publicized with fanfare. Instead, it was delivered through a series of quiet confirmations to the press. Journalists began receiving the same message. The king has acted in accordance with the responsibilities of the crown. No name. No details. But everyone knew what it meant. The backlash, of course, was immediate. Some of Meghan's supporters framed it as proof of royal cruelty, punishing a woman for speaking her truth. Others applauded the decision, calling it long overdue. Social media lit up in both directions, while royal watchers analyzed every word, every expression, every movement from both camps. And in the center of it all, Meghan, days from her birthday. Standing at the heart of a firestorm, she may have lit with careful precision. There were rumors that her team had prepped a response statement, but decided to wait. Others speculated that Meghan was shocked by the palace's swiftness and didn't expect titles to be pulled before the trailer even dropped. Regardless of the internal confusion, one thing became clear. This birthday would be remembered not for cake or candles, but for chaos. Even more unnerving was how the world waited. Not for Meghan's speech, not for Harry's reaction, but for the documentary. Would it air? Would it be sold? And if it did, how much of the Crown's carefully preserved dignity would survive? It began as a whisper in the upper circles of the entertainment world. A name, a title, and a quiet meeting behind closed doors in a high-rise office overlooking the Pacific Ocean. But within 48 hours, that whisper turned into a siren, blaring all the way from Los Angeles to London. Meghan Markle wasn't just working on a documentary. She was actively shopping the most controversial royal exposé of the decade, and it was already being described in entertainment circles as explosive, career-defining, and a declaration of war. The pitch deck didn't land in inboxes like a traditional proposal. It came encrypted, attached with non-disclosure agreements, and was initially shared only with a select handful of streaming executives at the highest levels. The name on the file was deceptively simple: Project Storm. But the contents were anything but. Executives who opened the file were met with a cinematic vision wrapped in emotional gravity. The first slide bore a chilling black-and-white photo. Meghan alone in a corridor, her back turned to the camera, looking toward a closed door. Beneath it, the tagline read, "Before she could speak, they closed the door. Now she opens it." That line alone sent shivers down the spines of those who read it. The deck was structured like a manifesto, part storytelling proposal, part evidentiary roadmap. It promised raw truth, unfiltered pain, and secrets the palace never wanted to see daylight. The tone wasn't vengeful in the obvious sense. Rather, it was mournful, reflective. But to those who knew the subtext, it was a carefully constructed attempt to rewrite a legacy and burn the bridge behind her. Slide after slide laid out what the documentary would explore. First, the origin story. How Meghan entered the royal family with hope, ambition, and genuine belief in the possibility of a modern monarchy. Then came the cracks, the whispered criticisms, the media manipulation, the internal resistance. Meghan positioned herself not merely as a woman of color entering a traditional family, but as a disruptor of an outdated system that would not accept her light. But what elevated this pitch from speculation to scandal was the content she promised to deliver. The deck claimed Meghan had compiled a personal archive during her time within the firm, and that archive included voice memos recorded during private meetings with palace advisors, communications staff, and even senior royals, handwritten letters between herself and King Charles during the height of the Megxit negotiations, private notes exchanged with the late Queen Elizabeth that reportedly revealed the monarch's internal conflict about Meghan's role. Behind-the-scenes footage that was allegedly omitted from the Netflix docuseries, scenes showing arguments, miscommunications, and raw moments of vulnerability. One segment in the pitch, titled "The Unheard Tapes," described how Meghan had kept a private audio journal for months during her time in the UK. These weren't formal recordings, but personal reflections, captured late at night, in whispered tones, often while Harry was asleep. She spoke of feeling watched, monitored, and betrayed by those who smiled to her face. It was this portion that sent tremors through every room of the palace once it was leaked. The idea that she had been documenting her innermost thoughts, feelings, and fears at the height of her royal involvement meant one thing. This had been building for years. Perhaps the most shocking inclusion was what Meghan labeled the forgotten chapter. It was an entire section dedicated to events she claimed were deliberately erased from public memory. Moments that didn't fit the narrative curated by the palace's press teams or the Netflix production company. She alleged there were meetings held in Windsor Castle, Kensington Palace, and Frogmore Cottage, where she was spoken to like a stranger, not a duchess. Where her concerns about security, privacy, and mental health were met with what she called polite indifference. In one slide, a quote stood out. "When I told them I was struggling, they nodded. When I cried, they blinked. When I disappeared, they moved on." Executives reading the pitch were stunned not just by the content, but by the calculated storytelling structure. Meghan wasn't just sharing what happened. She was crafting a narrative that placed herself as a historical figure caught in a cultural storm. A woman whose story echoed Princess Diana's legacy of pain, but with a digital age twist. Meghan was no longer just a duchess turned Hollywood figure. She was casting herself as a whistleblower. And perhaps most telling of all was what was missing. Nowhere in the deck was Prince Harry mentioned as a collaborator. His image appeared twice, in supportive scenes, smiling at public events. But there was no indication he was part of the project's creative team. No quotes, no promises of interviews, no credit. To industry insiders, that omission spoke volumes. Meghan was doing this on her own, whether Harry approved or not. Reactions from streaming giants were mixed, but intrigued. Some saw gold in the controversy. Others hesitated, fearing the legal backlash and royal condemnation that would surely follow. Still, the pitch was compelling. The content, too powerful to ignore. And if even a portion of it was authenticated, it would become the most-watched documentary of the year. Meanwhile, back in London, the leak reached royal advisors before it reached the press. At first, it came as a cryptic message forwarded by a media contact who had ties to the production world. "Have you seen this?" it asked, attaching a screenshot from one of the pitch slides. It showed the Queen's monogrammed stationery, partially redacted, with a handwritten line allegedly from Meghan's letter. The palace scrambled to verify. Within hours, more images surfaced. Aides confirmed that several of the letterhead formats, seals, and dates appeared real. That was enough. The atmosphere inside Buckingham shifted instantly. This was no longer gossip. This was not another celebrity book. This was a coordinated, multimedia campaign to redefine the royal narrative, and it carried the real risk of influencing public sentiment on a global scale. King Charles, known for his composure, reportedly closed the door to his private quarters for several hours. What he thought, said, or felt during that time remains unknown. But when he emerged, his instruction was clear: no more concessions, no more hesitation. Behind palace gates, the view was that Meghan had crossed the last line. Not only had she betrayed family privacy, but she had done so under the illusion of still being part of the institution. Her titles, privileges, and ceremonial roles, though largely symbolic, had remained intact. Until now, Charles saw only one path forward: complete separation, not just from the crown, but from the institution itself. She could not retain the appearance of duchesshood while simultaneously dismantling its legacy. To do so would weaken the very concept of royalty. And so, just days after the pitch had surfaced, Meghan's remaining ties to the monarchy were cut. Back in California, the news hit fast. Sources say Meghan had been in meetings with her PR team when the alerts popped up on major media outlets. King Charles revokes all royal titles from Meghan Markle. The reaction was not recorded, but insiders say the atmosphere shifted rapidly from optimism to damage control. What followed was a brief silence. Meghan, known for swift statements and rapid response messaging, said nothing. Her team declined to comment. Harry remained unseen, but the industry had already seen the pitch, and the world now knew what was coming. Meghan's truth, the silence before the storm, wasn't just a project anymore. It was a weapon. It was the part of the pitch that made even hardened industry veterans pause. Buried between slides showcasing handwritten letters and unflattering photographs from the height of royal turmoil, there it was, a section titled "The Unheard Tapes," for unassuming words that rattled Buckingham Palace to its core. Because this wasn't just another round of commentary or recollection. This was something far more intimate, far more invasive, and far more dangerous. Voice recordings, secretly captured, carefully archived, and now quietly shopped to global networks hungry for scandal and royal intrigue. According to the pitch deck, Meghan had allegedly kept a series of personal voice memos throughout her time in the royal fold, a sort of verbal diary that chronicled her evolving relationship with the monarchy. These weren't recorded interviews. They weren't press briefings or speeches. These were private reflections, recorded during or immediately after internal royal meetings, conversations, and moments behind closed doors. And the implications were seismic. One of the excerpts highlighted in the deck allegedly contained Meghan's whispered voice shortly after a tense exchange with a senior royal staffer. The tone was subdued, perhaps recorded in a bathroom or private study, but the words were unmistakable. "They don't see me. They see the problem I represent, and they'd rather it disappear." To some, it was a poetic lament. To the palace, it was evidence of premeditation, proof that Meghan had been gathering material, crafting a narrative, long before she ever left the UK. The recordings reportedly spanned nearly 18 months, from early in her marriage to just after the Sandringham summit. Some were as short as 20 seconds. Others ran for more than 10 minutes. Some were allegedly recorded in real time while Meghan sat in meetings with aides and family members, her phone discreetly positioned, her expression unchanged, even as her device captured everything. The ethics of it all were dizzying. Who records family meetings in secret? And if they do, is it for protection or revenge? That question now haunted every royal advisor, every press secretary, every senior official who had ever sat across from the Duchess of Sussex in a private setting. Suddenly, nothing felt safe. Every memory was suspect. Every conversation potentially captured and repackaged for public consumption. Sources who had been briefed on the content of the tapes, or at least the ones described in the deck, claimed they were devastating in their tone. Not because they revealed scandalous behavior, but because they painted a portrait of emotional neglect, of frosty silences, of missed chances for reconciliation. In one particularly harrowing segment, Meghan reportedly recounts an exchange where she voiced concerns about her mental health. The words echoed with pain. "I told them I didn't want to keep pretending I was fine, that I wasn't sleeping, that I felt invisible." He nodded and changed the subject. Whether the he in that statement was a royal figure, a staffer, or Harry himself is unclear. But the implication was powerful, that cries for help were met with cold efficiency, that the institution had prioritized image over humanity. Still, palace defenders argue context matters, that the royal household, bound by tradition and protocol, wasn't equipped for such emotional transparency. That silence, in their world, wasn't indifference, it was discretion, strength, the cost of centuries of composure. But in the documentary's framing, that silence became the villain. Another clip allegedly includes Meghan narrating her walk back from a meeting at Clarence House, her voice trembling. "They looked at me like I was intruding, like I was still trying to earn a seat at a table I had already been married into." These recordings, raw and unedited, would be at the heart of the documentary, not just as supplemental material, but as the spine of the story. A chapter-by-chapter emotional roadmap of Meghan's inner world, set against the backdrop of royal grandeur and ancient stone walls. And if the claims were true, some of these recordings weren't just about Meghan. The pitch implied, though didn't explicitly confirm, that conversations involving Harry and even select moments with Queen Elizabeth and King Charles were also documented, not covertly with microphones or wires, but captured immediately afterward through voice notes, Meghan's own whispered memory of what had just occurred. This blurred the line between reflection and surveillance. Was Meghan simply journaling her experience in audio form? Or was she scripting a documentary in real time, aware that someday these fragments could be stitched together into a global exposé? According to those familiar with the deck, the documentary was not interested in resolving that moral question. In fact, the project leaned into the ambiguity. It dared the audience to decide, was Meghan preserving her truth or weaponizing it? One executive reportedly asked Meghan's team about the legality of including such recordings, particularly if they captured or recounted the words of others. The reply was rehearsed, firm, and unsettling. Everything shared is within Meghan's personal recollection and possession. Any direct audio has been reviewed for editorial compliance. We're telling a lived experience, not publishing surveillance. That didn't settle royal nerves. Back in London, the idea of these recordings leaking, let alone airing, was almost unthinkable, not only because of what might be said, but because of the precedent it would set. If one royal could record, reflect, and redistribute private moments to the world, what would stop others from doing the same? And what message would that send to the world about the fragility of royal trust? Even within the family itself, the fallout was already unfolding. Aides revealed that Prince William had reacted with white-hot fury upon learning of the tapes. Not because he feared scandal, but because of the betrayal. He reportedly told a close confidant, "You don't record family, not unless you plan to hurt them." Harry, meanwhile, remained conspicuously silent. No public statement, no leak, no press maneuver, just silence. Some insiders believed he hadn't heard the tapes. Others whispered he had, and was broken by them. One particularly chilling rumor claimed Harry begged Meghan not to include anything involving his father or brother. Whether that plea was honored remains unknown. But the inclusion of one particular excerpt sparked the deepest fear within the monarchy. The deck described a moment, labeled the Corridor Confession, in which Meghan reportedly recorded a private voice memo after a conversation with the Queen. The exact dialogue was not shared, but the pitch claimed it revealed the stark loneliness behind the crown, and portrayed Elizabeth II as haunted by the women the monarchy couldn't protect. To the public, such a quote would be explosive. To the family, it was sacrilege. There was also talk of previously unseen footage, grainy, handheld clips taken on private walks, moments from the garden at Frogmore, reflections in the back of cars as they were driven from engagements. Nothing scandalous in the traditional sense, but deeply intimate. Even more jarring were the descriptions of what Meghan called coded language. Terms she claimed were frequently used in the palace to mask discomfort with her presence. Words like adjustment, transition, and integration, which she interpreted as veiled criticisms of her race, background, or personality. Whether those interpretations were fair or filtered through emotion remains debatable. But what is clear is that the recordings weren't just audio files. They were evidence. Evidence of how Meghan felt she was treated. Evidence of how she remembered being silenced. Evidence that she believed justified the dismantling of a centuries-old image. As news of the recordings spread across royal circles, one question lingered above the rest. How long had this been going on? Was Meghan recording during her pregnancy with Archie? Was she still recording during her final visit with the Queen? And most hauntingly, did Harry know? Some palace officials suspected he didn't. That this project had been Meghan's secret from the start. Others believed he knew, but chose not to ask questions. That he, too, felt betrayed by the institution, even if he hadn't anticipated the scale of the fallout. Regardless, the damage was done. The mere existence of the recordings, whether or not they ever aired, had shattered whatever remained of private trust between Meghan and the monarchy. In their eyes, she hadn't just left the family. She had spied on it, chronicled it, then wrapped it up for sale. And with each day, each leak, each rumor about the tapes, the storm grew darker. If the secret voice recordings shook the foundation of royal privacy, the letters allegedly exchanged between Meghan Markle and senior members of the royal family threatened to pull the entire facade down. Handwritten, deeply personal, and, according to sources, painstakingly preserved, these letters form one of the most incendiary parts of Meghan's documentary pitch. What made them so explosive wasn't just their content, but the fact that they were never intended to be public or even shared beyond the immediate family. Yet now, they are poised to rewrite the narrative of Meghan's time within the monarchy, painting a complex, emotional picture far different from the polished public statements and official press releases. The earliest letter reportedly dates back to late 2017, shortly after Meghan's engagement announcement. It was a gracious note from Queen Elizabeth II herself, welcoming Meghan into the family with warmth and an invitation to uphold royal tradition. Though the exact words remain undisclosed, palace insiders say the tone was formal but sincere, suggesting an initial openness to embracing the Duchess. But as the years progressed, the letters allegedly reveal a steadily growing tension, a slow drift from warmth to distance, from encouragement to cold caution. One letter, reportedly penned by Meghan to King Charles during the difficult months leading up to Megxit, is said to contain a heartfelt plea for understanding. Meghan wrote of feeling isolated, overwhelmed, and misunderstood by the institution she had entered with hope. She sought not only empathy but clear guidance on how to navigate the impossible balance of public duty and private happiness. According to those who have seen excerpts, The letter did not mince words. Meghan described moments of profound loneliness, instances where words were spoken behind closed doors that felt like knives. She spoke of the emotional toll taken by relentless media scrutiny, court intrigues, and whispered rumors that seemed to grow louder each day. She wrote of an aching desire to be seen not as a figure of controversy, but as a mother, a wife, and a woman striving to find her place. Yet, the responses, or lack thereof, allegedly captured a different reality. A letter, purportedly written by King Charles in response, was described as formal, distant, and notably devoid of emotional reassurance. Some sections were said to focus on protocol and duty, a reminder of the responsibilities Meghan had willingly accepted by joining the family. The tone was described by insiders as encouraging but firm, lacking warmth, and signaling a boundary that Meghan felt all too keenly. Meghan's side reportedly interpreted this as emotional coldness, a sign that the monarchy was unwilling or unable to support her in the way she needed. The letters also reportedly included exchanges with the late Queen Elizabeth. Some were described as brief but polite notes of encouragement. Others hinted at a monarch struggling to balance compassion with the demands of tradition. Sources claim one particularly poignant letter showed Elizabeth expressing sympathy for Meghan's mental health struggles, but also a tacit acknowledgement that change within the institution was slow and difficult. In the documentary's framing, these letters collectively paint a royal family caught between duty and detachment, a family that, while not necessarily hostile, was emotionally distant in a way that left Meghan isolated. More than mere correspondence, these letters serve as a textual roadmap of Meghan's emotional journey, from hopeful newcomer to embattled outsider. One of the most controversial aspects of the leaked letters involves Meghan's children. According to The Pitch, she wrote about fears for Archie and Lilibet's futures within the institution, concerns about racial identity, and anxieties over their safety. These sections are particularly sensitive given ongoing public debates about race and privilege within the monarchy. Palace insiders have neither confirmed nor denied the existence of these letters, citing privacy. But the very possibility has sent shockwaves through royal circles. The monarchy prides itself on discretion and confidentiality, virtues that, if breached in this way, could forever change how royal communications are handled. Some experts argue that the letters reveal a woman fighting for her voice in an unyielding system. Others see them as evidence of deep divides that, if exposed, could permanently damage the institution's reputation. What makes these letters particularly devastating is their permanence. Unlike recordings or interviews, which can be edited or denied, handwritten letters exist as physical artifacts, irrefutable proof of private thoughts and exchanges. In one letter, Meghan reportedly expressed heartbreak over the way the palace portrayed her in public statements and media leaks. She wrote that her reputation was being systematically dismantled by insiders seeking to protect the crown's image. This line is emblematic of the documentary's theme, a woman who felt used, rejected, and erased. Yet, some royal biographers caution against taking the letters at face value. They emphasize the complexity of royal relationships, shaped by centuries of protocol, public expectations, and private struggles. What may appear as coldness on paper can sometimes reflect the limitations of communication within such a rarefied institution. Still, the documentary pitch leans heavily on these letters as a foundational element of Meghan's story. They offer a glimpse behind the royal curtain, inviting viewers into a world where vulnerability and power collide in often painful ways. The implications extend beyond Meghan's narrative. If aired, these letters could open the door to new conversations about race, mental health, and the evolving role of the monarchy in the 21st century. They could also reshape public perceptions of King Charles and the late Queen Elizabeth, not as detached figures, but as complicated humans caught in a centuries-old machine. As anticipation builds, the palace's anxiety grows. Some see the letters as the final straw that justified stripping Meghan's titles. Others warn they may provoke an even fiercer public debate, one that the monarchy is ill-prepared to face. What remains clear is that these letters, once private and sacred, are about to become a public spectacle, and no one knows how the monarchy will survive the fallout. When the world first learned about Megxit in early 2020, it was framed as a calculated, mutual decision, a step back from public royal duties to prioritize mental health and family. The Netflix docuseries later recounted this saga with a polished narrative, candid interviews, emotionally charged scenes, and behind-the-scenes glimpses carefully curated for maximum impact. But according to Meghan's documentary pitch, a significant part of that story was left untold, intentionally omitted, sanitized, or re-edited to protect certain interests. What the palace referred to as the lost footage has now become one of the documentary's most highly anticipated segments. This lost footage reportedly includes raw, unfiltered clips from key moments during the 2019 and 2020 negotiations that led to the Sussexes' historic break from royal life. It captures private meetings, tense conversations, and emotional reactions that were either never filmed for Netflix or deliberately cut from the final edit. Meghan's team described the footage as a window into the truth, a chance to see the story from her perspective, warts and all. The most striking aspect of this footage is its intimacy. The clips show Meghan and Harry in settings rarely seen by the public, secluded rooms within Kensington Palace, private dining halls, and quiet gardens where official photo ops rarely tread. These moments reveal not just the pressures of royal life, but the very human vulnerabilities of the couple at the center of the storm. One scene reportedly shows Meghan pacing nervously in a waiting room just before a meeting with senior advisors. Her anxiety is palpable, her voice soft but resolute as she rehearses what she intends to say. The footage captures Harry's quiet reassurance, a rare moment of tenderness before the inevitable confrontation. Another sequence features a heated discussion between palace officials and the Sussexes' legal team. The tone is tense, voices raised, expressions strained. Meghan's frustration is evident. She challenges long-held protocols, pushing for changes that would allow her more independence and privacy. The officials respond with reminders of tradition and duty, highlighting the generational divide that shaped the negotiations. But perhaps the most compelling aspect of the lost footage is what it reveals about the family dynamics behind the headlines. In a clip described as heartbreaking, Harry is seen confiding in Meghan about his fears for their future, expressing regret, guilt, and a sense of isolation. The footage reveals the depth of his internal struggle as he balances loyalty to the crown with devotion to his wife and children. The documentary pitch claims that this footage shows sides of the story the palace wanted to keep hidden. Scenes where Meghan advocates fiercely for mental health resources, security, and cultural sensitivity are juxtaposed with moments where royal aides express skepticism or resistance. One particularly controversial segment reportedly includes a conversation with an unnamed senior royal advisor who is heard questioning Meghan's motives and suggesting that her public persona was at odds with palace realities. This raw, unedited exchange would, if aired, challenge the carefully managed image of unity and mutual respect the palace has sought to present. The Netflix special, according to Meghan's pitch, left out these difficult moments, opting instead for a more polished narrative that favored sympathetic interviews and selective storytelling. Meghan's documentary aims to fill that gap, to tell the story without filters, without edits designed to soften the blows. Behind the scenes, the existence of this lost footage has sent shockwaves. Royal commentators and insiders acknowledge that if even a fraction of this material is released, it will prompt a re-evaluation of the Sussexes' departure. It will challenge official accounts and invite the public to question everything they thought they knew. The footage also raises complex questions about privacy and consent. Who filmed these moments? Who authorized their recording? And how did Meghan obtain copies? According to sources, some clips were recorded by palace media teams as part of official documentation, others by Meghan's own aides and collaborators who understood the historical significance of the events unfolding. In some cases, the footage was reportedly shared with select individuals outside the palace as a safeguard against potential media distortions. This blurring of official and unofficial documentation has made the footage all the more valuable and volatile. King Charles reportedly reacted to news of the footage with alarm. For him, the thought of these behind-the-scenes moments airing publicly represented an unprecedented breach of royal confidentiality. It threatened not only his family's privacy, but the very trust upon which the monarchy relies. Legal experts consulted by the palace explored options to prevent the release, citing breach of confidentiality agreements and potential defamation. But with Meghan operating as an independent entity and the footage often in her possession, the legal path was uncertain and fraught with risk. The question then became one of timing and control. By planning to release the teaser trailer near Meghan's birthday, her team ensured that the spotlight would be intensely focused on these revelations, maximizing their impact. It would be impossible for the palace to deflect or downplay the fallout. In the weeks leading up to the announcement, palace insiders say emergency meetings were held to prepare for the storm. Communications teams rehearsed responses, security protocols were reviewed, and public relations strategies were sharpened. But nothing could fully prepare them for the emotional and political consequences. For Meghan and Harry, the lost footage represents more than just a storytelling tool. It is a reclaiming of agency, a chance to present their side of a story overshadowed by years of speculation, misrepresentation, and royal media management. Yet, it also risks deepening divides. The footage could harden opinions within the family, fuel public debate, and provoke renewed scrutiny of the monarchy's handling of race, mental health, and tradition. As the world waits to see what will be released, one truth remains clear. The lost footage of Megxit is not just history in motion, it is history rewritten. And for King Charles, it's a reckoning he cannot ignore. The moment the documentary pitch leaked, the palace was thrust into crisis mode. What began as a whisper in entertainment circles had exploded into a full-blown scandal with the potential to redefine the monarchy's modern narrative. It was clear that the royal family could no longer respond with measured diplomacy or quiet denials. The stakes were higher than ever. This was a direct challenge to the institution itself. King Charles convened an emergency meeting with his closest advisors at Clarence House. The gravity of the situation demanded swift and decisive action. According to insiders, the king's demeanor was grave but resolute. He recognized the danger of allowing Meghan's project to proceed unchecked, not only for the damage it could do to the crown's reputation, but for the precedent it might set. If one member of the family could weaponize private memories and personal recordings against the institution, who could not? The advisors presented multiple options. Legal recourse was debated, but advisors cautioned against a drawn-out court battle that would prolong media attention and risk further leaks. The court of public opinion could be harsher than any judge. Instead, the most immediate and symbolic action was clear: stripping Meghan Markle of all remaining royal titles and privileges. A move both punitive and protective, designed to send a message to Meghan, to Harry, and to the public. The king's decision was described as unprecedented in its swiftness. Historically, the revocation of titles involved lengthy consultation and careful timing. But this was different. Meghan's titles were revoked overnight, without prior warning. She was no longer the Duchess of Sussex, no longer Her Royal Highness, and was stripped of honorary military roles and patronages. Official correspondence ceased. Invitations to royal events were withdrawn. The palace communicated this decision with a carefully worded statement emphasizing the king's responsibility to protect the integrity of the monarchy. It highlighted that the move was in response to Meghan's actions, which were deemed incompatible with her continued royal status. This statement was immediately picked up by the global press and social media, igniting a firestorm of reaction. Royal watchers described the stripping of titles as a line in the sand, a moment of no return. Some viewed it as a necessary assertion of authority. Others criticized it as harsh, vindictive, and potentially damaging to the monarchy's public image. The palace's public relations team faced the monumental task of managing the narrative. They aimed to balance firmness with empathy, acknowledging the complexity of family relationships while defending the institution's values. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere was tense. Senior staff grappled with questions about security, public messaging, and the potential fallout among Commonwealth nations where the Sussex titles still held sway. Conversations stretched late into the night, reflecting the unprecedented nature of the crisis. Simultaneously, palace legal advisors prepared for possible challenges. Meghan's team had not yet publicly responded, but was expected to defend her right to freedom of expression and personal narrative. Sources suggest the king's decision was also influenced by concerns about Prince Harry's reaction. Despite the couple's estrangement from senior royals, Harry remained the king's son and a key figure in the monarchy's future. Advisors believed swift action might pressure Harry to reconsider his alliance with Meghan's project and align himself more closely with the crown. But that was a gamble. In the days following the announcement, Harry's behavior fueled speculation. He delayed public appearances, remained silent on social media, and reportedly sought private counsel. Some insiders say he was torn, caught between loyalty to his wife and respect for his father. Meanwhile, the palace began damage control across media outlets and diplomatic channels. The monarchy's global image was a delicate balancing act, respecting privacy and tradition while navigating modern demands for transparency and accountability. The palace was also mindful of the public's evolving attitudes toward Meghan and Harry. While some segments of the population sympathized with their struggles, others viewed their actions as betrayals. Internal communications within the royal household emphasized unity and resilience. Staff were encouraged to focus on long-term stability and prepare for upcoming royal engagements, all while managing the media storm. King Charles himself reportedly took a personal interest in briefing trusted confidants, emphasizing that the crown must endure beyond individual controversies. This crisis, more than any before, highlighted the challenges of maintaining a centuries-old institution in a hyper-connected, scrutinizing world. Meghan's documentary pitch and the palace's response represented a clash of narratives. One seeking to expose and redefine history, the other striving to preserve tradition and authority. As the battle lines were drawn, both sides prepared for what promised to be a protracted struggle over truth, loyalty, and legacy. The leak of Meghan Markle's documentary pitch was a shockwave that reverberated most profoundly through one person, Prince Harry. The very man whose royal ties had been severed alongside his wife's titles, yet who remained deeply entangled in the emotional web of family, loyalty, and personal identity. According to multiple sources close to the Sussex camp, Harry found out about the project not from Meghan herself, but through a third party, a media contact who recognized the pitch deck and alerted him in a moment of concern. The initial disbelief quickly gave way to a heavy silence. For days, Harry was reportedly unreachable by friends, family, and even Meghan. The silence spoke volumes. What was unfolding was not simply a public relations nightmare. It was a personal crisis. Harry, the young royal who had long struggled to reconcile his public role with private pain, now faced the most difficult fracture of his life, the growing gulf between his birth family and his chosen wife. The documentary pitch had blindsided him, exposing a rift he had hoped to mend quietly. Insiders say Harry was torn between his loyalty to Meghan and his shame over what she had done. He loves her deeply, one source told us, but he is ashamed of how this will reflect on the family and on himself. In private conversations, Harry allegedly expressed regret that he had not been involved in the documentary's creation or even made aware of it. The feeling of betrayal was mutual. He felt left out of a process that would inevitably shape his own legacy. His hesitation was not just emotional, but strategic. Palace insiders reveal that Harry implored King Charles to delay taking any action while he tried to understand the full scope of the documentary. He needed time, the insider explained. Time to process, to negotiate, to find a way to bridge the divide. But time was a luxury no one was willing to grant. The king's decision to strip Meghan's titles came swiftly and without consultation with Harry, deepening the rift. According to royal watchers, Harry's silence in the immediate aftermath was a mix of shock, anger, and profound sadness. Friends close to Harry describe him as withdrawn during this period. He canceled public appearances and communications, seeking solace away from the media spotlight. His social media accounts went quiet, further fueling speculation. Some reports claimed Harry had even refused to speak to Meghan for several days after the news broke, overwhelmed by the chaos and uncertain of how to reconcile his roles as son, husband, and father. But other sources close to the couple emphasized that the silence was less about estrangement and more about careful consideration. Harry was weighing the consequences of speaking out versus remaining silent. He was caught in an impossible position. His loyalty to Meghan, who he believed had been treated unfairly by the monarchy, conflicted with a deep sense of duty and affection toward his father and brother. The documentary pitch had torn open wounds that many hoped would heal quietly behind palace walls. The emotional toll was evident. Royal commentators have long noted Harry's vulnerability, especially after the loss of his mother, Princess Diana. That vulnerability now extended to the fractured relationships with his immediate family and his very public struggles to carve out a new identity. In conversations with close friends, Harry reportedly confided that he felt overwhelmed by the pressure to choose sides. "I don't want to hurt my family," he said, "but I can't betray my wife either." The documentary's timing, coming days before Meghan's birthday and so soon after Megxit, intensified these conflicts. Harry was forced to confront the possibility that the woman he loved might be willing to risk everything, including their family ties, for her truth. This was not the loyal son who once stood defiantly beside his brother at the palace gates. It was a man fractured, uncertain, and searching for a way forward in a fractured family. Meanwhile, the palace viewed Harry's silence with growing impatience. Some senior officials privately expressed frustration that Harry had not condemned the documentary or distanced himself from Meghan's actions. They feared that his hesitation was enabling further damage to the monarchy's reputation. Others believed Harry was trapped in a liminal space, neither fully inside nor outside the royal fold, and that his struggle was as much about identity as it was about loyalty. The fallout extended beyond family dynamics. Meghan's documentary pitch, coupled with Harry's silence, sparked debates among royal experts, media outlets, and the public about the future of the monarchy and the role of the Sussexes within it. Was Harry simply a victim caught between two worlds? Or was he complicit in a campaign that sought to undermine his own family? The questions remain unanswered. For now, Harry's silence speaks louder than words. He remains a man suspended between love and shame, family and freedom, tradition and transformation. And as the documentary looms, his next move may determine not only his own fate, but that of the monarchy itself. As the storm around Meghan Markle's documentary pitch grew, so too did the voices from her inner circle rise in defense, fiercely protective and unyielding. Meghan's friends, advisors, and longtime allies painted a portrait starkly different from that of a vengeful figure tearing apart the royal family. To them, Meghan was not the aggressor but the victim, a woman courageously reclaiming her narrative after years of suppression and betrayal. One close confidant described the documentary as a long overdue act of empowerment. "Meghan has been silenced for too long," they said. "This is her moment to tell her truth, to expose the realities behind the palace walls and finally have her voice heard on her own terms." Public relations strategists working with Meghan reportedly viewed the timing of the documentary's release as a deliberate but necessary strike. An essential move to regain control of a story that had often been dictated by tabloids, palace insiders, and media spin. They argued that Meghan's project was not about destruction, but about healing, both personal and public. The documentary was framed as a humanizing journey, a candid look at a woman navigating impossible pressures within an archaic institution. Friends stressed that the content was carefully curated to avoid unnecessary harm, focusing instead on emotional truth rather than scandal-mongering. "It's about shedding light on what was really happening behind closed doors," a spokesperson explained. "This isn't just Meghan's story. It's a story about change, about a monarchy that needs to evolve." Some in Meghan's circle went further, suggesting that the documentary was a necessary reckoning for the institution. "The monarchy has long resisted transparency," one insider said. "Meghan is forcing it to confront uncomfortable truths. That's why this project matters." The defense also highlighted Meghan's ongoing commitment to charitable causes and social justice work. They argued that the documentary would illuminate not just personal grievances, but also systemic issues, including race, mental health, and gender dynamics, that had shaped her experience. To them, the film was a vital conversation starter, a call for empathy and reform rather than mere spectacle. Supporters also criticized the palace's swift decision to strip Meghan's titles as punitive and disproportionate. They questioned why the crown would respond with such harshness to a woman exercising her right to free expression. "This is about control," one publicist claimed. "It's about sending a message to anyone who dares speak out." Meghan's legal team reportedly reviewed the palace's actions carefully, preparing for a possible public battle over the rights to her personal story. While no lawsuits had been filed at the time, the threat of legal challenges loomed. Despite the fierce public defense, Meghan's supporters acknowledged the risks involved. They recognized that the documentary could deepen divisions within the royal family and provoke backlash from traditionalists. But they argued that remaining silent was not an option. "This is her truth, and it deserves to be told," said a close advisor. "She's willing to face the consequences because silence has cost her too much already." Within the broader entertainment industry, reactions were similarly mixed. Some executives hailed the project as a groundbreaking opportunity to glimpse royal life from a fresh perspective. Others were wary of the controversy and potential legal entanglements, but acknowledged the undeniable public interest. In the media, commentators debated the ethics of revealing private communications and recordings. Some praised Meghan's courage in challenging the monarchy's opacity, while others questioned the propriety of exposing intimate family moments. Social media became a battleground. Hashtags supporting Meghan's right to tell her story trended alongside calls to protect royal privacy and uphold tradition. For Meghan's circle, the overwhelming message was clear. This documentary was not just a film. It was a statement. It was a challenge to the old order. And it was a demand for recognition and respect. As preparations continued behind the scenes, Meghan's team reportedly began crafting strategic messaging to accompany the documentary's release, focusing on themes of resilience, truth, and hope. They planned to emphasize Meghan's humanity, her vulnerabilities, her strength, and her unwavering commitment to her family and causes. But they also signaled readiness to confront criticism head-on, willing to stand firm in the face of palace reprisals. This was more than a media project. It was a battle for narrative control, for legacy, and for justice. And Meghan's circle was determined not to back down.